The ship came back to the same spot from which it had left, and it was quite obvious from the observers on the deck of the carrier that something was very much wrong. First, they could not raise anyone on the radio. Secondly, through binoculars, they could see the special antenna on the top of the main mast. That is the one that was used for the Project Invisibility was broken. There was some other superficial damage visible on the ship, but the most important thing was that they saw sailors moving around on the deck, and they could get no response on the radio. A boarding party was told aboard the Eldridge, which it did, and that is when they found the real extent of the damage. They found 2 sailors buried in the steel deck, dying. Their bodies were intermingled with the steel, and of course nobody could understand how that happened, not at that point. 2 more were found upright, buried in the steel bulkhead. One of them was our younger brother, Jim. We had a younger brother by the name of Jim, 6 years younger than Duncan. He enlisted in the Navy in 1941 after Pearl Harbor, and one could say he drew the short straw and became part of that second fateful crew. He was dying. This is what was observed. And one other man, a 5th man, had a hand up to his wrist buried in the steel bulkhead, and he lived. They cut his hand off, gave him an artificial one later. There were also found some other very strange activities. A number of sailors were running around on the deck, I should say, milling around rather crazily on the deck, totally disoriented, totally out of it, and to all intents and purposes could be considered as quite insane. They certainly were oblivious to their location, their whereabouts, and what was going on. And with all of this, of course, radio communication from the boarding party, they put a second boarding party in to take the ship back up the harbor and back into the location of the back section of the Nord. And then, of course, after that was accomplished, and the sick ones and the dead were removed. The dead were removed complete with steel plates and buried complete with steel plates in this unmarked cemetery south of Arlington. The Navy, of course, during this period of the 4 days following, had a board of inquiry. Navy loves boards of inquiry, and of course they pulled up everybody possible. What happened? They wanted to find out, quite obviously. Several officers gave their testimony. I gave mine. They didn't believe me after I gave my testimony. John von Neumann gave some testimony, but he didn't really see what happened. And after all of this, John Neumann took me aside. I might add, Duncan, my brother, was missing. He was not there among those available to give some enlightenment as to what had happened. After all of this, and a decision made by the board some days later, they decided they wanted to do another test with the Eldridge, a 3rd test. There was a lot of destroyed equipment on board the Eldridge at that time when it was returned to the harbor and when they took it in the back section of the Navy Yard. And they replaced it. Over a period of time, they removed it all. They had spare systems in storage because they expected everything to be fully operational and to be fully a success. About 10 sets of spare equipment, complete, were available. So they ripped out the damaged equipment, replaced it with some good working equipment, did some subsystem tests, and on some day late in October of 1943, they took the ship back down much further below where they had been in the wider part of the harbor at night, put it on station, removed all of the personnel, and ran all of the equipment, remote control on very long cables, something between 1,500 and 2,000 feet to an adjacent ship, where controls were set up. And this took quite a while to set this whole setup, to design it, build it, and get it in place. And with the return of the Eldridge from this late night test down the harbor in a very broad part of the bay, the ship returned. They found again burned out equipment on board the ship. That is the equipment related to the invisibility test. At that point, the Navy threw up their hands, decided to scrap the entire series of tests, returned the ship to the Navy Yard with orders to remove the heavy equipment and re-outfit it as a standard vessel of war, because they were very short of Navy ships at that time in the middle of the war in 1943.